solutions, and today, like she said, we're going to talk about SolidWorks Electrical. So what is SolidWorks Electrical? SolidWorks Electrical is comprised of two different interfaces. Your first interface is your 2D schematic interface. In this interface, this is where you can develop your overall design or your overall electrical network design, kind of a 30,000-foot view of how your electrical system is going to be wired up. Next, you have your multi-line schematic design as well, where of course it's more detailed pin connections and such for your components and connectors and things. You're also able to develop a 3D panel layout from your schematic tool, so you can determine how components will be placed within an enclosure. And lastly, you can also leverage your control design in here as well. So if you have things like PLCs and such, you can also develop that information in your schematic 2D SolidWorks Electrical as well. This package is primarily for electrical designers or engineers who are doing electrical design and a kind of a standalone environment. Well, there's another package or an additional add-on there, the SolidWorks Electrical 3D. This is where, or more useful for electrical engineers or designers who are collaborating with the mechanical team, or if themselves are more of an electromechanical designer and they kind of dibble and dabble in both the electrical and mechanical side. Using SolidWorks Electrical 3D, you can use the schematic information that you've developed in your schematic to determine or figure out how components will be best placed in your 3D model. And from there, you can determine the best routing practices as well. You can also input harness and cable information, which will allow you to get manufacturing drawings of your harness or cabling so that you can use that information for nailed down production to create an actual harness in a one-to-one relationship. Well, in the background of SolidWorks Electrical, there's a SQL database. And this SQL database allows the tool to constantly talk in real time, allowing information to constantly be sent back and forth and making sure that all of your drawings are up to date. Now, the collaboration of this tool is, the heart of it is in the library of SolidWorks Electrical. So SolidWorks Electrical comes with a very large library of components, both 2D and 3D users can leverage. By using your SolidWorks Electrical, you can determine your single line diagram, your multi-line schematic, your 3D part assembly, and your 2D footprint model as well. And you can customize all that very easily from the interface within SolidWorks Electrical. SolidWorks Electrical also has this kind of a all-inclusive interface where from your schematic or from your mechanical 3D design, you can determine all of the aspects that will be for your electrical design. Meaning, you can determine your synoptic diagram where you can have a generic view of your 3D model and you can determine placement of your component. You can determine your, again, that single line diagram where you have that kind of 30,000-foot view of how your system's going to be wired up. You can determine your multi-line schematic, giving you that more detailed description of how components are going to be wired. You also can leverage information from your schematic to develop a terminal strip drawing. And you can determine both your 2D and 3D layout information as well, all from within one interface. And then lastly, you can generate your reports in SolidWorks instantly from all the information you've developed within an interface as well. All of this is done from within one interface. SolidWorks Electrical is highly automated as well, meaning that regardless as to whatever interface you're in, if you make a change in one place, that change is now translated to the other interfaces. The benefit of this is that it keeps all the users up to date, and it makes sure that all the information that you change, so if you change a part, that part is now changed across the board inside your design, so you don't have to go back and now to remember to change either your bill of materials or update a certain component in your 3D model or in your single line diagram. If you change it in one place, it'll prompt to change it everywhere. All right, so let's see what that looks like. So here we are now in SolidWorks Electrical, and I have opened my single line diagram. So you can see that I can develop all of my components in here, and I can determine how those components are wired up. Well, I can also determine the location placement of these components. So you see I have this magenta box going around all my components that are signifying that these are on my chassis or my back panel. This is not just a pretty colored box. This actually will delineate the location that these components are, which keeps my design organized throughout the process. So if I now decide that I want to insert a symbol, one of the intuitive features of SolidWorks Electrical is that it remembers the last motor or the last symbol that I put in, and it'll automatically choose that symbol for me. If I decide I don't want to use this symbol, then I just click on Other Symbols. And SolidWorks Electrical comes with hundreds of different symbols already pre-default into your library for you. So you can come in here and you can look through all the different symbols that are available to you within SolidWorks Electrical. But I do want to go ahead and put in my motor. So I'll go ahead and place that in here. And you'll notice that the tool wants to prompt me to make this my M6 motor. And the reason that it's doing that is because it recognizes that the last motor I put in was M5. So it automatically increments all of my tags, keeping all of my components in order, in sequence in how they're inserted into my project. But let's just say that I didn't want it to be M6. Actually, what I've gone and done is I've predefined all of the parts and components that'll be for my project. So if you want to pre-design your projects where you know that, or maybe you're going to re-engineer something, so maybe you have a component and you now need to kind of document it, you can re-engineer your design by inserting all the parts and components that you're going to be using, and then as you build your actual schematic, you can utilize that information. So I'll come in here and I'll select my M4 motor that I already inserted into my design. And you see that changes and now adds all the manufacturer data to my part as well. Lastly, I'll connect it using a simplistic wire diagram within the single line interface. Another very familiar interface is our multi-line schematic. So in here, I can develop wires and I can develop cable information as well and place all of my components within relationship to those wires. Well, the tool works a lot like Windows Database, where I can actually copy and paste information seamlessly within my design. When I do that, you'll see that all my wires wired up, but that the components also incremented. So no longer was it CB3, it's now CB7 and CR7 and TD1 and so forth. This means that as you copy and paste within the interface, it actually creates additional instances of it so that you don't have to go back through the process of modifying tag information or editing text. Also, if I decided to remove components from my line, you'll see that wires will automatically seam up. And in reverse, if I add parts back in, wires are automatically trimmed as well. Here's the interface where I have all of my information in one fell swoop. So I have things like my cover page, I have a table of contents, which is referred to as my report, I have my single line diagram, all of my multi-schematics. I even have reference documents in here as well. So if I needed to add a document that actually specified specific key points about products that I'm using, I can include that into my design as well. And then lastly, I can also embed 3D SolidWorks electrical models in here. So now let's jump over to our SolidWorks Electrical 3D and see what that looks like. All right, so now we're in our SolidWorks Electrical 3D, which is an add-on to SolidWorks. So I get all the functionality of SolidWorks inside SolidWorks Electrical 3D. And I get the additional benefits of SolidWorks Electrical 3D, which is really more of the collaboration and communication between the schematic and my 3D model. But one thing to take note of is that I have these two tabs here, the tab here on the right and the tab here on the left. The tab here on the right allows me to actually come in and see all of the documentation that the electrical designer developed. I can't modify any of this. I can only see it. From the left side, this actually gives me a list of components based on the components that have been inserted in the electrical schematic. So this is a real time saver, from what I understand, of a lot of mechanical engineers, where they don't have to try to figure out the components the electrical engineer was trying to use. They simply open up the drawing, open up the project that the electrical engineer is working on, and all the components will be over here on the left panel, sort of like the feature tree, a lot like SolidWorks Electrical. So here we have our feature tree for the mechanical aspect of it, and then over here we have our feature tree for our electrical aspects. Well, also, when components are inserted in your design, a checkbox is placed beside it, letting you know that the component has been satisfied within your 3D model. Well, a checks and balance is this hide already inserted components. So if I select it, it actually filters out all the components that have already been inserted in my model. So now if I go back and look, I'll only see the components that need to be inserted in my 3D model. So I can go through and begin to add some of these components into my assembly. Sorry about that, I had another drawing open. And I can begin to add components into my 3D model. And you'll see that as I add those components in there, a checkbox is placed within my model. You see that some of these other ones don't have checkboxes in them. All right, so now that I have some components inserted into my model, I can again hit the hide already insert a component, come back to it, and notice that those components are now gone. Well, now that I have some components inserted in my model, I can now begin to determine how I want things, how wires routed. Within the SolidWorks Electrical 3D tab up here, I can go to Route Wires. In doing this, I can begin to route either 3D sketches, which is kind of just a representation of the wires and how they're going to be routed, or I can actually create solid models within my interface using SolidWorks Route. When I do that, it'll utilize the information from my schematic, all the connection point information, plus how I laid out the components within my 3D model to determine the best routing practice for all my wires. So it'll take a few to go through and just figure out how all the wires will be routed throughout my schematic. This feature is a very, I guess, improved feature from the routing aspect from within SolidWorks. So you could basically route wires within SolidWorks, but there would be a lot of upfront work done, whereas SolidWorks Electrical actually generates a lot of the upfront work for you, saving you the time to go through and delineate which wires are going to go where. Another benefit of inserting your components in the 3D space and routing the wires is you can determine how to fit. You can determine clearances for your components. So if you're working in a tight space, you can simulate your enclosure and insert your components and see how, or the best layout would be for those components. And then depending on the type of voltages you're working with, if you have high voltage or medium voltage versus low voltage or communication, you can actually also determine how you want those to be laid out. So now that we have all of our wires routed in our enclosure, if I needed to, I can go through and specify how I wanted those different wires to be separated. So I have my yellow type, my red type, my brown types, and I could specify, select my wire type here. And SolidWorks Electrical comes with a library of wires already that's easily customizable as well. But I could come in here and specify which wire I wanted to use, or which wire I wanted to specify to go to one different area or another. So if I wanted, for instance, see, I don't using any of these wires in here, but if I wanted to specify this one, I could say, okay, well, exclude it from that duct, or I could say include it in this duct, and I could specify where I want those wires to actually be routed. All right, so jumping back over here into SolidWorks Electrical 2D though, when we're back into the tool here, now that we've routed the wires within SolidWorks Electrical 3D, we can now go in and look at our reports. And you'll see that we have our bill of materials here already generated for us because it was being generated simultaneously in the background through our SQL database. But then we also have our list of wires as well that we routed. You see that we have some conductor links in here, as well as some from-to information. Well, I can now generate these and add these to my design if I needed to. When I do that, what happens is it'll add a page plus put the report down for me on the page based on how I've determined that setup to be. So you see now over here in my design, my project, I now have all of my reports in here. When I look at those reports, you see I have them neatly organized in here and separated per manufacturer. This can also be modified, so if you wanted it to be one straight table, you could, and if you didn't want it to be broken between manufacturer, you don't have to have that as well. This is completely customizable as to how you have this represented. As well as your wire information. So you can see I have my origin and my destination as well as the length and the color of that wire in here. Again, this is completely customizable as to how you would want it shown. Lastly, I'd show that all the wires in here have neglected to be numbered. So using some other tools I've used in the past, going through and numbering all my wires is a manual process where I am using a tag or a text feature and going through and actually determining each number structure for each wire. Well, within SolidWorks Electrical, I can actually come into process and number new wires, and it'll actually number all of the wires for me within my entire project. So what it's doing right now is reading the formula that I've created for all my wires, and then going through and adding all those numbers for each individual wire within the project. The information that you have represented on your wires is completely customizable again. So if you want things like the color or the gauge or the wire type, you can have all that information on there, as well as column or row information as well. It appears to be taking longer than normal, and it won't let me stop it right now. So I'll just kind of let that run in the background for right now. Okay, so the benefits of SolidWorks Electrical. The first benefit is overall design accuracy. Basically, all of your designs are, based on that SQL database, all of your designs are kept up to date and synchronized. You're able to determine your wire, cable, and harness management. So you can determine all of your detailed routing and such. You can automate your manufacturing drawings, meaning that you can do your terminal strip layouts. You can create nail-down drawings for your harnesses. And you can also calculate your different reports. So, or you can determine how your reports are calculated. So your cable links, your power loss, voltage drop. You can put in formulas that will actually generate that information from your model. And lastly, by utilizing SolidWorks Electrical 3D, you can begin to leverage some of the other features of SolidWorks. So you can do some analysis on it for like heat or airflow or things of that nature. You could also use other tools where you can have generate, more visual designs for your marketing and such. So that concludes my general overview of SolidWorks Electrical. Hello?
All right, thanks, Wayne. That was great. Are there any questions out there? And while we're waiting for questions, I just want you all to know that this webinar and all of our webinars can be accessed from our webpage at trimec.com. Upper right-hand corner, you'll see our Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and our YouTube channel. Just check there. Click on our YouTube channel, and you will see this and all of our other webinars we have done. All right, well, it doesn't look like there's any questions at this time. I would just like to thank you all again for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.